Good afternoon to all of you, and a very warm welcome to today's webinar on the implementation of the National Education Policy 2020 in higher education institutions. I am Vijayta Raghuram, the Program Manager Education at India Bioscience. India Bioscience is a not-for-profit organization which is primarily funded by the Department of Biotechnology, Government of India. We act as a catalyst and a facilitator to strengthen the life science community in India by working with and for educators, students, researchers, policymakers, and entrepreneurs. In the 12 years since our inception, we have performed a number of activities to enable networking of life science professionals, increase the visibility of Indian scientific research and opportunities, to aid the development of soft skills that are necessary to navigate through various science careers, to establish a node for discussion on policy matters, and finally, under the education vertical, our aim is to connect educators and researchers in an effort to promote research-based pedagogy and also provide a platform for discussion on biology education in India in general. In this regard, we have published a number of articles on undergraduate education in India, biology education particularly. In fact, most of our articles have been written by practicing educators. So if you are an educator and if you have a flair for writing, I invite you to write for us. And just send us a gist of what you wish to write about to education@indiabioscience.org, and we will get back to you. We also have published books on pedagogy, on science careers, a number of curated educational resources from across the web. We have a discussion forum for educators. We host webinars and podcasts, and also advertise jobs, grants, and events for educators on our website. Today's webinar is on a very pertinent topic of education in India, the implementation of NEP 2020. And we will be joined today by eminent speaker and an eminent moderator. The speaker is Dr. Shakila Shamsu, the former Officer in Special Duty NEP at the Department of Higher Education. And the moderator for today's webinar is Dr. Hemalatha Reddy, the former principal of Venkateswara College, University of Delhi. The webinar is going to be live streamed on YouTube, LinkedIn, and the India Bioscience website. We will be collecting questions throughout the webinar. So I invite all of you in the audience to post your questions for the speaker at any time during the webinar. And at the end, we will have a Q&A session where we will be requesting Dr. Shakila to answer as many questions as time allows. So the participants on Zoom can post their questions on the Q&A box, and the participants in the YouTube and LinkedIn platforms can post their questions in the chat box. So before we start the webinar, I invite all of you in the audience to participate in this audience poll to help us get to know you a little bit. People who have joined us on YouTube and LinkedIn can also participate in this audience poll using the form that has been posted in the chat box. And while you are participating in this poll, I invite Dr. Shakila Shamsu and Dr. Hemalatha Reddy to start their video and join the webinar, please. Welcome, Dr. Hemalatha. Welcome, Dr. Shakila, to the webinar.
Thank you, Vijay. Thank you, Vijayta. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you, Dr. Hemalatha.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Shakila, for joining us today. So I think most of the people have put their votes. So maybe we can end the poll now. All right, so most of you are educators from the biology field, but I'm seeing that at least 18% are also from other disciplines. And some of you are researchers and students and in some other category also. So I'm very happy to see the curiosity about this topic in the audience, and I welcome all of you to this webinar. Okay.
Okay.
So,
Shall I? Yes.
let me introduce you, ma'am, to the audience. So, the moderator of today's webinar is Dr. Hemalatha Reddy, a PhD in medical biochemistry and the former principal of Sri Venkateswara College, University of Delhi.
Vijeta,
Sorry.
your screen has distorted a little bit. Maybe you can stop sharing and share again. Yeah, this is fine. This is fine.
This is fine?
Yes.
Is it fine again? Like.
Now, okay, fine. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So besides being a leader, Dr. Hemalatha has been involved extensively in curriculum development for UG courses at Delhi University. She has been a member of a number of national committees in and outside Delhi University, including DBT, UGC, and NAC. She is presently serving as an advisory member of Delhi Effective Education Pedagogy Cluster, or DEEP-C, which is a vertical of the Delhi Science and Technology Cluster at IIT Delhi to develop faculty development programs on effective education. She has also developed pedagogical tools, e-resources, and lecture plans with support from DBT and ISER Pune. She is an executive member of the Federation of Asian Biotech Associations, where she is involved in promoting interaction between academia, scientists, and industry in the biotechnology space in 21 partner countries. So Dr. Hemalatha, thank you so much for joining us today. And I now request you to please say a few words about today's webinar and about our esteemed speaker, and invite her to begin the talk. So over to you both now.
Yeah. Thank you, Vijeta. Thank you. I'm audible and visible.
Yes.
Video is okay. Yeah. Thanks to India Bioscience through Vijeta for arranging such a nice seminar, which is the very required one in present days. Because in many of the states now, national education policy, either it is implemented or under the implementation mode. So this national education policy, it has totally transformed Indian education system. The vision has been given by none other than a team of academicians, and Dr. Shakila Shamsu has been one amongst them. So she is the right person for us today to discuss such an important topic with all the biology educators. So what exactly is national education policy wants from all the educators? Because basically it is focusing on a holistic development of a student to develop experiential critical thinking and learning through experience. So this is taking the students away from their rote learning methods. Many of the transformational things have been introduced, both in a preschool education, higher education, and introduced bank of credits, as well as internalization. Teacher training is so important in this particular aspect because still now the teachers are all used for a different methodology for the students to make them ready for their global competition. But now with this latest national education policy, by bringing the paradigm shift in the education methodology, teachers also need to be trained, because there are like multidisciplinarity has been given a lot of importance in this, as well as lifelong learning, and a lot of digital technology has been brought into the classrooms. So this has made the teachers also to learn and introduce this innovative technologies to the students. This is what we call it as reimagining the education in a broader landscape. So what is government is doing in this? Because implementation for all these ambitious schools, implementation is very, very important. That's where the forums like this, India Biosense, when they bring the educators and the visionaries on a same platform to discuss about how to actually implement to the extent. So what exactly they are trying to do in national education policy? The flexibility in higher education, which is very much required for a present day student. It's a bouquet of the courses which will be offered, and the student can pick up and uh, create their own undergraduate program with the courses which have been offered, multiple entry and exit systems. And for all these reasons, evaluation also has to be changed. So the teachers have to be trained in a different evaluation of the students. And very important aspect of this national education policy is bringing the regional languages in our engineering education, so that many students who are from the rural areas, the backgrounds for in remote places, are able to do achieve their dreams through their engineering education. But the challenges, many challenges are there in this, and how to face these challenges. Of course, government is doing its own agenda. They have taken national, they have involved National Testing Agency, CBSE, NCERT, NIOS to prepare the curriculum as well as to keep the schools ready for this by 22-23. As well a joint entrance examination for both JEE as well as for the National Eligibility Educational Test has been like is going to be soon it is going to be implemented. But apart from that, actually when it is bringing into the institutions, lot of administrative and educational reforms are required. Many states have already, like Gujarat, Madhya Pradesh, Himachal Pradesh, Karnataka have already implemented, and rest of the states have introduced many task forces to do how actually this has to be implemented to meet the vision of those people who have actually drafted. So in this context, today's webinar, we are going to have one such visionary amongst us who is going to tell us what was there when they have drafted this national education policy, as well as, because being an administrator, she can guide all of us also the administrative challenges when we are going to implement actually at the grassroots level. So Dr. Shakila Shamsu, who has been there in Ministry of Higher Education earlier, formerly OSD New Education Policy and Department of Higher Education, Ministry of Education, has been the secretary to the committee to draft National Education Policy and has been a part of the entire journey in the formulation of this current education policy. Her passion towards education and transform the education is enormous. I've been part of that, one of her webinars. I can vouch for that. She just, this like a contagious, that her passion. She was the nodal officer of the flagship GO of Government of India scheme of National Mission on Teachers and Teacher Training Programs. She held senior positions like Joint Advisor Education in Planning Commission, OST 12th Plan in Ministry of Education. Her career spans over 39 years in teaching and academics in the University of Mumbai, IGNOU, and 14 years in Government of India. Her interest areas are education planning and policy making, teacher education, ICT, and open and distance learning and inclusive education. A PhD in education, gold medalist for masters, PG diploma in distance education and a degree in law. She has articles in international journals, book contributions, and prepared 11th and 12th plan and government reports. She has been a member of various committees of Government of India, state governments, UGC, UCF, national selection committees, and has addressed several national and international conferences. And she is the right person to give us the perspective behind this and how to take it forward. And she can educate all our participants here. So I invite Dr. Shakila Shamsu ma'am to take the floor and address all the participants. Thank you. Over to you, Dr. Shakila.
Thank you, Dr. Hemalatha Reddy. Good afternoon to all. I thank India Bioscience and the team of Vijeta Raghuram and Suchi and Gitanjali who are there, and all the esteemed educators who have gathered here today, and which instills a certain sense of happiness in me, because even today we have a lot of educators who would like to understand what the National Education Policy 2020 is all about. As we speak, you are aware that this has been approved almost more than a year back, 29 July 2020. So it's about a year and about 4 months down the line. And the implementation, as Dr. Hemalatha mentioned, the key to any policy lies in how well we are able to translate that policy on the ground. And as far as the National Education Policy 2020, the document itself is a very crisp one of just about 66 pages, which actually has emanated from, I would call, one of the most humongous consultation processes that any policy making exercise has ever undertaken. And we had, prior to the draft National Education Policy 2019, which the committee had put before the government and which was accepted by the government, we had as many as 5 lakh suggestions that went into the making of that policy from all stakeholders, ranging from students to teachers to policymakers, administrators, honorable members of the parliament, the civil society, industry, all the range of stakeholders. And after the draft NEP to the NEP 2020, it has taken, there has been over 2 lakh suggestions that we received. So if you look at this, the very sheer numbers, it has been one of the most participatory exercises in policy making. And the strength of a policy would lie also in the process in which that policy has been made. Because the ability to accept a policy and implement it becomes easier. Now, philosophically, the NEP 2020 is a transformative document which seeks to be aspirational in nature, to empower students and teachers and educational institutions who are the main stakeholders to rise up to the occasion of the challenges that are placed in the 21st century. These challenges emanate from the fact that there has been disruptive technologies and fast-moving information and communication technologies, which made the globe almost like a village and a very connected society. It also has the reason because India as a country has one of the youngest populations in the world today, a window of opportunity which lasts up to 2036, and which, if we have to leverage that, has to have an education which is suited to that kind of futuristic needs of a youth population. It also stems from the fact that India as a country is committed to the Sustainable Development Goals of 2030, and particularly the SDG Goal 4, which is to ensure quality, which is to ensure inclusive and quality equitable education with lifelong learning opportunities to all. It is also founded on the idea of how learning should take place in the 21st century, where learning is not seen as a unidimensional activity, but is seen as multidimensional in trying to have learning to know the cognitive, learning to do the experiential, learning to live together and to live with others, and finally learning to be, which is an internalized aspect of one's potential being optimized through the education system. So the NEP 2020 as a comprehensive document, starting from preschool education at the age 3 and going on to cover the entire school education through a new curricular and pedagogical architecture of the 5+3+3+4 architecture, which is not a physical or a structural architecture, but more an approach to the manner in which curricular choices have to be made, an approach to the pedagogies that need to be involved, and the assessment and evaluation patterns that accompany that, so as to actually translate, as Dr. Reddy had correctly pointed out, to move away from rote learning to assessing the competencies of learners, where actual understanding and comprehension by the students should give them the right kind of knowledge, capabilities, and skills that help them to translate the knowledge and the concepts that they have acquired into real life situations, into the world of work, into their world of research, and so on. So the disconnect between what is seen between the world of education and the world of the work is sought to be bridged right from the schooling stages. And in the new curricular architecture of the foundational stage of the first 5, then the preparatory stage of the next 3 years, and then the middle stage of another 3 years, and finally the secondary stage, is an idea of trying to say the interconnectedness among all these stages, and that there is something that happens in an age-appropriate manner, which is evidenced by the fact that neural development takes place in a certain manner right from very early ages and goes on to get reinforced as they move into higher stages of learning. Now, in higher education, because of the paucity of time, I may not be able to really touch upon a lot of reforms that actually start from early learning onwards into the school education, which actually is the bedrock on which the changes that will follow in higher education. And just as we start in the middle school with a lot of flexibility in the curricular choices, doing away with the hard separation of art, science, commerce, academic and curricular and extracurricular and co-curricular, doing away with those silo-based demarcations that we have been so used to mentally, is translated into higher education into what we call a flexible, integrated, multidisciplinary undergraduate program. And that is, I would say, the key reform that is sought to be brought about in the higher education institutions. Now, it is a huge challenge in a country like ours, which firstly has a colonial history of education, which only seek to create an English-speaking class of people and which remained elitist by nature. And here is an attempt by trying to actually reach it out and make it sustainable, to offer it to all cross-sections of the society and take into account that it is not just the intelligence that matters, but there could be multiple talents that children are blessed with, and where the education system should act as an enabler for them to actualize that. Now, the idea of, therefore, flexibility in higher education with multidisciplinary choices gives a wide range of subjects that students can opt for as they enter into the undergraduate program, which range from maybe mechanical engineering on one side, to learning dance form, to learning a vocational subject, to learning a language, or to learning a social science subject. This is coming from the fact that human beings are created with multiple intelligences and competencies and talents and aspirations. And an education system cannot focus on only one of them and expect to achieve what we call the holistic development of the individual. By the term itself, holistic would mean being a well-rounded individual in which all talents are sort of showcased in an individual. And that talent which is there, and that's why that learning in the 21st century, the document that I referred to, the Jacques Delors Commission report, learning the treasure within. The treasure is within each one of us. And the education system should allow that treasure to be found, to be nurtured, so that we are able to actually actualize that in a real life situation, contributing to our, the holistic development. So the undergraduate program, which currently for the general education is 3 years, for the professional is 4 years, we have set the flexibility of saying it could be 3 years or 4 years, and the flexibility is in the choice of the subjects. The flexibility is also in the modes of learning. Because when you say that someone can take up mechanical engineering with music, the engineering college would not have ability to provide music as a subject. So the student would have to do that either from another institution or from a distance learning mode or a MOOCs course. So the flexibility is in the mode of learning, the flexibility in the multiple number of institutions from where the credits are being acquired. And that is why the most important implementation that I could say on ground has happened so far is bringing out the notification for the academic bank of credit, which is an individualized, customized, digitally stored credit bank of students, which stores the academic credits earned by a student across institutions, across different modes of learning, because it is not possible to offer multidisciplinary courses as it exists today under one roof. We are visualizing that by the time the policy gets implemented in its totality in a 20-year window of time, many of our institutions would have transformed from single discipline or 3 or 4 majoring disciplines to become really multidisciplinary in the real sense of the term. The policy itself says that we can have MERUs, that is the multidisciplinary education and research universities, which will be a combination of having multidisciplinary courses and combining the 2 major functions of teaching and research to become truly what we call model multidisciplinary education and research universities. And that's how MERUs are envisaged in the policy. But while all existing greenfields, brownfields institutions cannot overnight become multidisciplinary, we expect a gradual effort being made by the higher education institutions to transform themselves to become multidisciplinary. So I always say in the talks that we have on the webinar on national education policy, let us not look at as if we are responsible for implementing every aspect of the national education policy. Our role is to think, where do I stand in terms of being able to contribute to that? And this is where, as educators, your role as faculty to shed our own inhibitions and to shed our own biases in terms of our disciplinary egos, and to think that a discipline does not, get fossilized when it interacts with another discipline. Rather, history and all evolution has shown us that anything which has to survive, if it has got to survive, it has got to be the fittest. And if it has got to be the fittest, it has to change with the changing times. Otherwise, you will fossilize. And the same is true of any disciplinary knowledge. And therefore, if biology has to exist, it needs to understand its ramifications with social sciences. It needs to understand its ramifications with engineering. It needs to understand its ramifications with other disciplines, including languages and so on. So disciplines do not get, let us say, fossilized because they become interacted with other disciplines. They become interdisciplinary, they become multidisciplinary. Rather, the depth and the breadth of that knowledge of that discipline widens when you accept it as becoming multidisciplinary. So as teachers, it is very important for us as educators that in implementing the national education policy, if we go by our mindset of being very structured to think that only this discipline is significant, then you would never be able to translate yourself to become an educator, embracing the idea of multidisciplinarity, which looks into intradisciplinary aspects, interdisciplinary aspects, transdisciplinary aspects, cross-disciplinary aspects, and knowledge by its very nature being porous in the 21st century needs to understand this in its totality. Therefore, we as educators, and I say that as an educator myself, where we do not like to be shaken out from our comfort zone, we would be the ones who would be most necessarily having to change our mindsets, because attitudinal change only then can lead to implementation of innovations and new thinking that comes about in the manner of teaching and learning. Because once you accept that, then the manner of teaching learning would transform. And the policy, while talking about the 3-year, 4-year undergraduate program, gives in a lot of flexibility for students to exit and rejoin, taking into consideration the need for constant upgradation of skills and knowledge in the idea of lifelong learning. Learning does not stop at a certain age in the current century. And the obsolescence of knowledge is something that is so relevant, so critical in today's world. Unless we make our students understand that they have to keep reinventing themselves, and that is the whole idea. The whole idea of multidisciplinarity comes from this. The adages that we hear today, we do not know what the future jobs of tomorrow look like. Because if you have artificial intelligence and machine learning and robotics, which are challenging human intelligences and taking over the jobs that human beings were doing, then we should have our young students who should be able to adapt themselves to that kind of technological disruptive technologies and use the new skills that would be needed so that they are in control of the disruptive technologies. Any amount of technologies should not have the technology becoming the master. The man must still remain the master over the machine. Otherwise, you would have it like the Frankenstein. That is basically the reason why we need to have multidisciplinarity, where children are equipped with multiple skills, so that if one has become obsolete, the student can revert, can change, reinvent themselves, not revert, to reinvent themselves to use another skill that the student may know. And you see that in the field of media, in the field of tourism, in the field of many areas, you are having the ICTs and the digital technologies playing such an important role. And it is important that our students also acquire what we call the 21st century skills, which should very innocuously enter into the way in which the teaching learning happens. So the collaborative methods of learning, having good communication skills, networking skills, teamwork, being able to handle crisis, time management. These are all the skills that you don't take separate classes for that, but it comes in while you transact the curriculum in any curricula that you're teaching. It needs to come in that into the curricula in the way in which the transaction is happening, for which the teacher also would have to have a total turnaround in the way the person teaches. The active learner engagement. And let us be very clear, we are not here in the 21st century to disseminate information to our learners. Thanks to the internet and the World Wide Web, they are available at the fingertips of the students, and they would be able to access it much faster than you and me, who do not belong to that generation of the digital ages. But these children who are born in a time when mobiles and the internet and the all these modern methods of gadgets are available, they are more adept at using it than you and I. What are we there as? We are there as facilitators. We are there to actually help them, teach them how to learn in a more effective manner. Learning how to learn is what the teacher's role is getting transformed to, because information accessing is not really an issue. But knowledge dissemination, yes, that continues to remain, and that is why you continue to have undergraduate teaching and postgraduate teaching, and knowledge production and knowledge generation, where the research part comes in, is the other important aspect. And the NEP tries to say that higher education institutions need to have a new architecture of categorization of higher education institutions, not by the character of that institution in terms of its ownership, centrally funded institutions, state funded institutions, deemed universities, private universities, unitary universities, affiliating universities, but by the function that it performs. Is it a teaching intensive university where largely there is undergraduate teaching to some extent with postgraduate teaching and research, or is it a research intensive institution focused largely on research and to some degree of undergraduate teaching? At the same time, all undergraduate education tries to put into practice internships and project-based learning. This is where I told about the disconnect that we have between what is being taught in the institutions and what happens on the world of work. If you give internship projects to all students, which currently remains the prerogative only of technical and management and so on, it has to come into all undergraduate education, because even the bifurcations that we have of technical and professional and all that, to a certain extent gets obliterated when all of them tend to become multidisciplinary. So even a student of medicine would have the option of studying a subject in languages or in social sciences. So also a student in engineering would be learning something like economics or maybe music. So the categorization of institutions also in terms of this silo-based thinking that we have would change. At the same time, projects have to run through all undergraduate education. Internships have to run through it. Where it is needed for actual hands-on, you can have apprenticeship depending upon the discipline that is being taken. Now, while these are the changes that happens in the academic side, the teachers, as I said, would have to become completely innovative in the way they approach the curriculum. The policy has 3 sections on teachers. One on school teachers and the need for effective teaching in schools. The second for teacher education as a discipline and the need for multidisciplinary integrated pre-service teacher education programs of BSc, B.Ed and so on, having national professional standards for teachers, and the draft is just out in public domain and the website of the National Council for Teacher Education. NPST is up for 1 month seeking comments on the professional standards. I was privileged to be a part of that committee too, which is looking at laying down benchmarks and professional standards for teachers. It's very unfair that teachers are being told that they are not of good quality when you don't have any standards set to what is it that you are actually evaluating them or assessing them. So the NPST has been framed or is there in a draft stage seeking comments. And on faculty, the chapter 13 on energized, motivated and capable faculty for higher education, all these underscore the criticality of teachers as the main instrument for transforming the education policy into reality. So while you can wait for legislative measures for the Higher Education Commission of India, foreign education providers, for entry of foreign institutions, while these are the legislative measures, leave it to the government. As institutions and as faculty, you need to start thinking on the way in which the paradigm shift will take place to move from rote-based learning to experiential learning, where you involve the learners right from day one into active classrooms, where they are feeling that they are equally important in the curricular transaction that is happening, where teachers and learners are seen as partners in a joint effort of trying to communicate a certain discipline or a certain curricula, where effective learning outcomes by the learners is the end goal that is sought to be achieved. In that, if you think that only lecturing and a monologue would be able to evince any kind of learner engagement, we are highly fallacious in our thinking. We need to really bring about this change in the way we need to. Suppose this was not a webinar and it was a session that I was taking for the students, I would not be talking for the first 1.5 hours at all. I would like the students to be reacting to certain discussions, bring the entire class into a discussion, and you know that they are good at it. Please understand, you're dealing with an 18-year-old who already has the right to vote. And that becomes very critical to understand that the person is capable of deciding who runs this country or the state or a local body. And such a person, let us give credence and the benefit of saying that the person is capable of independent, rational thinking, and engage them in that class rather than making very casual statements that they are not here to learn, they are only here to get a certificate. If they are like that, we are responsible for that. We have not been able to ignite their curiosity, and we have not been able to sort of ignite their critical thinking and their power of questioning. So these changes have to come about in the faculty. On the students, of course, the policy talks about creating optimal learning environments with academic counseling, career counseling, socio-emotional counseling, and that is important because of stress that has come in, and also providing vibrant opportunities for their participation in debates, sports, physical fitness, and so on. The policy highlights the need for expanding and strengthening vocational education in an integrated manner. So the existing BVOC programs would also become multidisciplinary, and not looking at vocational education as if it was one-off, rather than it is mainstreamed and therefore integrated within the idea of multidisciplinary education. Also, a very robust open and distance learning, because the need to move away from brick and mortar to online education is usually instrumental through the open and distance learning methodologies. But the quality assurance of these open and distance learning institutions are a matter of concern, and therefore quality assurance is also looked at from the open and distance learning. Internationalization of higher education. So on one side, we are talking of embedding the value systems that Indian civilizational is known for. On the other side, we are talking, that's why I always feel that the NEP 2020 is like an Hobbesian argument, where there is a thesis and an antithesis, and the synthesis is what is being offered through the NEP 2020. So the internationalization of higher education looks into the fact that India was once seen as being the world leader in education. And to restore that glory of what it once had, we must encourage student mobility, faculty mobility, and also institutional mobility. So the draft guidelines for the joint degrees, the twinning programs, the dual degrees are already up on the site of the UGC. As far as programs like Gyan and Gyan Plus, they look a lot in terms of the faculty mobility, but also to encourage India's strength across other countries. We would like to see some of our institution open campuses outside and vice versa, but that would be a legislative exercise. But to facilitate foreign students coming here and also encourage offering courses which are core to India, such as yoga or Ayurveda or Indian languages or Indian music and so on, we are saying that all institutions should set up international students office. Now, for a forum like India Bioscience, talking about the National Research Foundation would be very critical, because it rather is a forum more for the researchers. The NRF has already become functional in the Office of the Principal Scientific Advisor to the Prime Minister, and they are already having earmarked budgetary allocations being given. NRF would like to, is like an umbrella institution which would actually try to ensure that there is greater knowledge production and more patents and publications that are brought out, which would ensure India's presence as a research, and its contribution to the research production that is seen globally. Right now, it is abysmally low. The investments are abysmally low, and NRF seeks to bring about corrections in all these aspects. But what is important, it is trying to bring about three major players together: the higher education institutions, the industry, and the research laboratories together. And when I say higher education institutions, mainly to germinate and seed research within undergraduate education. See, research doesn't happen just like this. You need to actually ingrain that in our youngsters right at a very young age. that comes with the spirit of inquiry and the spirit of questioning, which we seek to always sort of shut down in the schooling system. Doing that going forward, you need to do that in the undergraduate education, which is only focusing on knowledge dissemination and not on knowledge production and knowledge generation. So the idea of startups and entrepreneurship, these are all the new ways in which the NRF would actually encourage incubation clusters and centers of excellence, which will allow for interdisciplinary research and research in uncharted areas. And therefore, the NRF will really catalyze the research culture within the country, and organizations like India Bioscience and many others who have possibly been starved of research grants will have an opportunity to get seed grants for taking up research in some of these areas. The policy has a whole lot of reforms looked at from the governance point of view, which time would not permit me to really talk about it a lot. But I would like to say that the policy has been inclusive in terms of looking at how the socially and the economically disadvantaged groups, which is an umbrella term used for the marginalized sections, which we commonly understand as the scheduled castes, the scheduled tribes, the OBCs, the linguistic and religious minorities, the urban poor, those with physical disabilities, learning disabilities, women, transgenders, living in geographically inaccessible areas. For them, the creation of special education zones, creating earmarked funds, the social inclusion funds, the gender inclusion funds, including offering higher education, and not just engineering education, but all undergraduate education can be offered in regional languages. As an agrarian country, where many do not enter the portals of higher education because of the diffidence with which they feel they cannot pursue higher education in English, this would be a game changer to increase the access of higher education. And the policy also reiterates, looking at the linguistic diversity of this rich country, that we should promote Indian languages. And if you see the website of the Ministry of Education, they have recently set up a committee for promotion of Indian languages. The policy says that we should set up more language departments. We should be creating, we are already announced they're setting up of a institute for translation and interpretation. All these would to ensure that India's linguistic strength in offering higher education could also get maximized. More importantly, it is culture that it is rooted to. And knowing a language actually adds to that. And we are at the moment facing a threat where many of our cultural roots would be lost if we do not understand the dramatics in Malayalam or the folklore in Marathi or the Northeastern handicrafts. India is like a, it's like a mosaic of all this cultures and dress styles and folklores and music and so on. All that stems from language. And that is why the importance of promoting, preserving, and developing languages becomes critical, and higher education institutions are expected to play a very important role in that. The whole policy accepts that there is a lot of, let us say, inequalities, institutional inequalities, social inequalities, and the idea of mentoring and mentorship to do hand-holding of institutions, of individuals, have always played through and through the role of volunteer efforts and so on. So the NEP 2020 has so many opportunities for bringing about transformation. And it is left to each one of us in our roles. And I may just stop with one particular point, which I think each one of you coming from different institutions should look at, is that every higher education institution has to have a strategic plan of action. We call that in the document as the institutional development plan, which is only an instrument in writing where you are going to articulate what is your short-term, medium-term, and long-term vision of going forward. Of course, there are many other reforms that the NEP 2020 talks about, but I am only igniting your curiosity into some of these areas which would be directly relevant to us as stakeholders. I do look forward to an interaction, and if I've overshot myself, I think It's just that I get very passionate about talking about NEP, and I do that. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Thank you, Hemalatha, and thank you to India Bioscience.
Thank you, Dr. Shakila. That's been a very, very passionate and in-depth talk about national education policy and the implementation challenges. And as you said, learning is not seen unidimensionally, but it is like a multidimensionally we have to see. And that's where we as an educators, we have to be very clear so that we can translate the same knowledge to the students. And your views and the clarity about multidisciplinarity helps all the educators to have that mindset which can be changed, so that to see the education as a holistic, not from in a silos. So, and the other important aspect which all as a teachers, which we are all interested is that NEP is really focusing on a teacher training and the quality accreditations and everything. You have taken care, as well as you are trying to take the views of number of educators through the draft policies. So hopefully with the institutional administrative plans which have been given, when all the administrators can take it rightly with a lot of orientations, and I don't see any difficulty in implementing over the period of time national education policy for the future generations. So with that, there are multiple questions, lot of questions are coming. So we will take up the questions one after the other so that it will be nice to interact with all the teachers. So now the first question I'll take is from Ramakrishnan Sitaraman. What is Dr. Shamsu's advice for small private colleges with constraints in terms of staff strength and finances, who cannot probably expend their disciplinary offerings much? So over to you, Dr. Shamsu.
So the policy, thank you, Hemalatha, and thank you to the questionnaire, to the person who has questioned. It is a very valid question. In fact, very, very pertinent in a country like ours, which has about 40,000 colleges, which are affiliated to universities and which have very little scope for becoming really multidisciplinary with limited staff strength. I would only say that the policy has talked about some of the colleges, being mentored, handheld to actually start becoming more robust in terms of both quality assurance and in terms of and that's where the institutional development plan becomes very critical to assess where are our strengths, can we offer courses in some new areas which would be in the region context specific factor, very relevant to the students in that area. So I would only say that private colleges, depending on your location, add in the skill-based courses that could come in, add in language courses that could come in, enter into collaborative arrangements with other institutions, because the policy talks of higher education clusters. That is one way in which, while the college itself is limited by its scope because of its funding, because of the staff strength and all other limitations, to enter into academic arrangements with other institutions, where a student joins college A, but can take up courses offered by another college in the same vicinity, or take up open and distance learning courses of open universities, or take up courses through MOOCs. And that is possible because now we are asking the institutions to start adopting the academic bank of credit. While I say that, the initial year, we are not thinking that all colleges would adopt the academic bank of credit because of the level of institutional preparedness not being there to go into implementing that. But gradually, and all reforms in the social sector, particularly education and health, is time taking. So we can start the preparatory work of thinking about which are those new courses, getting into arrangements, which are the open university courses that we can allow students to take. The MOOCs courses, SWAYAM is there, and you can use those facilities. And yesterday itself, the Kerala governor was giving out awards and said that hardly institutions here are allowing the students to take up courses, whereas UGC allows 40% of the credits to be done through online courses. So when these facilities are already there, you also as a faculty can inform your management, because they may not necessarily know about these academic facilities that are there. And therefore, such a private college, which is a very small college in a particular area, can also expand its reach and allow students to move towards multidisciplinary education.
Thank you, Dr. Shakila. There is a related question. Probably you have answered that in your earlier response, but I'll read out that question. This is from Murugappan Ramanathan. Under NEP, if a student enrolled in one university moves to another place or another university or college in second or third year, can he carry the credits to the new university? If it is so, is it not necessary to implement NEP nationwide instead of implementing here and there, that is in one state or other? Thank you.
Yes, any policy, Dr. Murugan is very right in saying that if a policy's entire benefits should flow out to all the students within the country, it is important that it is implemented across the nation. And the policy or the governments must also understand that if students in their own state need to get the benefit of this kind of facilities, of having an academic bank of credit and allowing for students to accumulate their credits while they transfer themselves to other institutions, they should not, as a matter of merely a political baton, say that they would not implement it. So far, the government of India has been engaging with the states to put forward this idea that while you may not implement the policy in totality, there are some things which have got national ramifications. The 3-year, 4-year undergraduate program, moving into multidisciplinary with multiple entry and exit, having the academic bank of credit, and Dr. Murugan's question whether the student can carry forward these credits. Yes, under the idea of academic bank of credit, that is what we intend. So if I am studying in Mumbai University and I move to Jamia Millia or Delhi University or in Karnataka, any university, I cannot be asked to repeat what I have studied in my first year and second year. All those credits actually get carried forward. I sort of redeem those credits in that university and bring it forward into this university. That's how the ABC have a look at the guidelines. But for that, all the institutions across the country must understand that there are certain things we have to do in the interest of the student. And the student stands to benefit by such a flexible approach. Therefore, while the government of India has not said that the national education policy should not be implemented or so, some of the states who are raising these kind of concerns, they should be actually made to understand that this is in the interest of the student. Ultimately, the policy has been made for the interest of the student, and therefore give them that flexibility to exit and rejoin. To exit and rejoin must be there only if academic bank of credit is implemented. So you cannot have a policy being truncated when it is not implemented in some parts, because then those students in that region cannot reap the benefits of such kind of reforms.
Absolutely true that any policies from the government, when it is going to be implemented across, then only the entire vision will be translated. Now, on that background, there is one more question which is coming up on a pandemic and the implementation of NEP. This is from Dr. Mary Jayanti. My concern is how can institutions embrace national education policy in the flux of pandemic? The post-pandemic classrooms face basic challenges to make first-generation students adapt to blended learning. How to effectively make this paradigm shift to implement NEP effectively? Thank you.
Actually, the pandemic has been a dampener in many ways, we are all aware. And today we have the report of ACER, which has been brought out for school education, which said that online learning has taken place. In many of the states, less than even 10% of learning has taken place in the school education. The ACER survey covers school education, and I'm sure the story is not very different even in higher education, except that the digital devices, individual digital devices, are maybe exploited better by adult children, and therefore maybe even with digital divide issues, there has been some degree of learning that has taken place. But it is a fact that when we are now reopening educational institutions, be they schools or colleges, the psychological damage, one, that has happened in this whole process of the pandemic. Second, the fact that, bringing them back, it was like weaning them away from learning and bringing them back into a learning by actually exploiting the blended learning methodologies is truly a challenge for the teacher. But I think that can be sort of looked at if you are able to understand within the class, just like you would do it within an actual physical classroom. Students who are those who would have learned irrespective or despite whether they had a class or not. Another category who required some minimal support, and another which required deep support. And this categorization in the way we actually deploy the kind of educational technology. So I was a part of bringing out a document with the Association of Health Providers of India. Maybe I'll share it with Vijeta so that others can read through it. But that was basically for the schools. But what we are trying to say over here is that the children need to be actually sort of brought back into the learning cycle in a gradual manner. And those which required remedial, or I don't like the word remedial, frankly, but those who require greater attention should be given greater attention by the teachers. And I think the protocols that we have cannot be one size fits all, depending on the discipline that is being taught, depending on the locale that is being taught, depending on the access to technology that is being taught, that is available in an institution. Taking these parameters, I think judicious interventions have to be brought on force. Now, leave aside the NEP reforms. We want to bring learning back into the track first. And that, I think, has to be the priority. But learning in a manner which is not burdensome, which will again incite the joy of learning. I think as educators, it is very important right from school to higher education. Learning should be a joyful activity, not a burdensome activity. I think we have done enormous damage to the mental and physical health, encouraging suicides by students, snuffing out lives. And if we look back on our own mistakes that we have made on our answer scripts, how many of us remember what mistakes we made? And they're snuffing out their lives because we have put misplaced priorities on certain professions and feeling that if they cannot achieve that goal, that is not the way in which, and that is what NEP is trying to say, the stress of exams, the stress of coaching, having exams which assess broader competencies, at the same time, knowledge specific. So we moved in class 10 and class 12 to 2-level exams, one being objective and one being summative. These are some of the examination reforms which are looking at the overall well-being of the student and not making that initial 25 years of their life almost like a crisis situation. So in the pandemic also, that was a double-edged sword that we have to handle. I think we need to, as teachers, be sensitive to the class of students that we are having to deal with. Those, if I'm saying that coming from deeply tribal areas where children had to climb on trees and mountains to get any network facility, can we think of offline classes, even if it was asynchronous? So that kind of methods need to be used. And I think we need to go one step at a time in a very slow, adaptable manner.
Yeah, to continue the same methodology of teaching, some of the questions have come and I will just pick it up one. Sahadeva Shankarappa, the question is more related to actual implementation of new teaching techniques. As an example, a discussion mode of learning where students participate is no doubt a powerful way of learning, but it is also time consuming. I say this in terms of covering the syllabi for courses, which are quite expansive. It would become impossible to cover the traditional recommended syllabus in the expected timeline. How do we balance this out?
So when we use a flipped classroom technique, it is very important that we keep the quantum of the curriculum that we need to cover and use that background material that we give to the learners, where they read that material or they sort of form their own views on that particular material, come into the class, and if you have a session of about 45 minutes, while 45 minutes cannot go into the discussion because you are having your burden of completing that syllabi, you have given them something, you take out only about 15 minutes for discussion with pointed questions that you give to them in advance and tell them that in the first initial 15 minutes, let us just talk about these 2 or 3 aspects. Those, if they're purely conceptual, will also give you a feedback on which are those areas in which students need more emphasis on when you actually try to cover that syllabus. But when the testing changes from the coverage of that syllabus in the manner in which that is sort of to be assessed of a student, and it is not entire coverage of that syllabus, but making them comprehend that, and even by an experiment or even in a manner that is visual by that factor, that may be a better way of trying to tackle the syllabus heavy load. But I think we need to experiment and innovate how we can do this, because there are umpteen ways of doing it. Correct. Including using small video clips to explain a very difficult concept, and then inciting, encouraging a discussion, and then going on to the main syllabi, by which people's preparedness to learn or understand that assimilation process becomes easier, by which it allows you to cover more into that class. That's how I look at it. But balancing it, yes, is a very critical factor, and we need to prepare our class notes and our preparatory work for a class to be done like that. That work increases for a teacher, and that's why I said we are moved out of our comfort zone and have to do a lot of other preparatory work than just going and taking a class in our routine sense.
Yeah, exactly. That is what you were trying to tell us, that teachers will be co-creators and facilitators. That's where the entire syllabus, they have to see from a very different frame of mind, and innovative teaching technologies are very much required to implement NEP. And that's where we require the training of these teachers also. That is why many of these refresher courses and everything is coming up. Next, we move on to the assessment methods. That is also a very important aspect of this education.
Dr. Hemalatha,
yes.
I think this will be the last question we take in the interest of time.
Thank you, Vijeta. Thank you. And let me complete the question and we'll wind up by the exact time. Innovative pedagogical approaches will also require innovative assessment methods. What kind of support framework would you suggest for teachers to actuate this? Over to you, Dr. Shakila.
Yeah. So we, as I said, that starting from the school education, where we are looking at a lot of new ways of assessing students, and which again is going into higher education, where we would firstly like projects to be given to students, which give an overview of the entire subject. That is one way. The other is to have, quizzes, gamification, many other ways from the standard question answers, from MCQs or descriptive type and short answers and so on. So have some of the training programs that we are looking at are actually on both these aspects, how to bring in multidisciplinary refresher courses, and the other is the pedagogies that flow with that multidisciplinarity, and the third is on the assessment part of it. And assessment, I'm sure that we need not really just wait for the training part of it, but gamification, using technology, using methods by which you give them Google Forms, you give them many other ways in which maybe ask them to go out, group work together, 5 of them doing it together, many ways by which you are not testing their memory, but testing whether they have really comprehended and understood what they have sort of been taught about, and whether they can actually put that in use when translating that into action. That kind of questions which are application based, which test their analytical thinking, those are the kind of innovations that we have. And there are n number of materials available on the internet. As I said, we are blessed with that. Unlike earlier times, we had to go to a library, read. You can actually browse through and get all these. There are so many others. But yes, the National Higher Education Qualification Framework, which is in the making, will also tell you the number of credits for different combinations and the kind of assessments that need to accompany that. But it's only the broad framework, not the syllabi related question banks that are created. While question banks still continue to remain one of the major ways in which you can think of some of the testing in the conventional manner.
Thank you, Dr. Shakila. In fact, it's a very ideal situation in case in future, if it comes, assessment should cater to the actual knowledge of a particular student rather than a general question paper and a general methodology. And with all these reforms, even evaluation reforms will happen, and we hope that should happen so that we can really assess a student to the knowledge he gained. With that note, thanks a lot for such a wonderful discussion, and this message and the kind of interaction with the clear perception which about our national education policy and the challenges which we face and how to go about it, the inputs which you have given, it's going to be very, very useful. And I hope that all these educators will take it back, and definitely they'll try to contribute for this innovation and implementation for the future of this country. Thank you. Thanks a lot. Thank you, Vijeta.
Thank you, Hemalatha. Dr. Hemalatha.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Shakila and Dr. Hemalatha, for the wonderful session. Mirroring what Dr. Hemalatha said just now, we are hopeful that our audience, particularly the educators and the administrators who joined us today, would have found a lot of pointers and a lot to ponder over the implementation of NEP. I particularly like the point that you made that NEP or no NEP, learning and the joy of learning should be at the center of our focus. So thank you for raising that point. Let me thank all our team members who were working remotely for the smooth running of today's webinar. Suchibrata Bora, consultant for digital initiatives at India Bioscience, who was the technical host on Zoom, and Geetanjali Monto, consultant science communication, who was the host on YouTube. Last but not the least, thanks to all our audience for joining us today. We would love to know what you thought of today's webinar. So I request you all to kindly spare a few minutes after the webinar to share your feedback with us. We are sorry if we couldn't take all your questions. We will be, forwarding all the questions to Dr. Shakila so that she could answer them on our discussion forum. So I invite you all to continue the discussion on NEP, which, it is indeed a very, very important that this discussion continues using our discussion forum. And the link for it is provided in the chat box. We hope to bring more webinars for educators in the near future. So keep an eye on our website, www.indiabioscience.org, or subscribe to our newsletters for receiving regular updates of our activities. On that note, goodbye and stay safe. Thank you.